For today's project, I'm going to show you how I painted this dot mandala stone, and I hope you follow along. To start off this mandala, I'm going to start with the plus symbol. I'm using the larger end of the dotting tool, and the paint I'm using is like an iridescent white from Liquitex, and I've added some extra white paint to it, and it kind of gives off this kind of like silvery pearly white color, and it's really cool paint that I've really enjoyed using lately. And I just thought it would be really pretty on top of this metallic blue. So to do these walking the dots, I'm using this really small tool that I got off of Amazon. I do have the link of it in the description down below. Since these are really tiny dots for this first part, if you would like, you can skip doing the walking the dots section, but still put that big dot at the top because you'll need that for the next part. And then just don't do this little part of walking the dots in this tiny spot. And that's totally fine. Just do whatever is going to work for you and that's going to make you happy. So for this next section, I'm using the large end of the dotting tool, the same I used for the first row. And I'm just placing it in between those two sections, but lift it up a little bit higher. I want to leave some of that blue showing. And then I'm just going to walk the dots down to right between where that first dot is on that first row and the one next to it. If you skipped walking the dots, then just go to right under that first dot because that's the same spot that I'm going to. And then this is pretty much the pattern I'm going to use for this entire stone. So it's a really good one to practice walking the dots, because with this section of walking the dots, you really don't have to worry about your spacing too much. And if you get off a little bit, you're going to be able to get back on track pretty easily without it really interfering with the rest of your design. So be kind to yourself, take it slow, and just see how it ends up going for you. It's just a really good practice piece, and in the end, you're going to have a beautiful piece. For this next section, I ended up going to a larger tool for my big dots, and that just made it, because as I'm working my way out, I'm going to end up needing larger tools. So when I go to walk the dot, I'm going to use a larger dot on the top, and then I'm going to switch to a smaller tool to do smaller dots down the side. And same thing, I'm going to end up walking the dots straight to that first dot, just right under it. And I'm making sure to leave that extra blue. You see how much blue space I left between the big dots and the small dot from the first row. And that's just so the blue can be seen. You want that base color to be seen on this design, and you want a lot of that negative space, because without it, you're going to lose the blue color, and that was just kind of the whole point of adding it. So that size was the size I used for these big dots. Unfortunately, I had walked away for some reason, and I came back and I forgot to hit record when I started painting. But all I did was add those big dots, and when I added them, I had to dip them into paint twice to make sure that they ended up that round. And then I used the large end of a dotting tool for the first dot for the walking the dots, and then the small end for the other four as I moved my way around to the circle. And same pattern, just going straight to that first dot. So for this next section, I went to a larger tool once again, and you'll see how I double dip it. And what I'm doing there is I'm just adding more paint. I'm giving the dot more volume. So when it dries, it will dry nice and rounded, like an M&M shape, instead of flat or with like a little peak just in the center. I wanted more of like that dome-shaped look. And that's the same way that I did the dots on the previous row that I forgot to record. But it's the same idea. I'm just using a larger tool this time. So once again, I used the large end for the first dot and the small end for the dots on the side. And since I'm at the edge of the stone, I then decided to go ahead and make this 2 layers. So I ended up doing another large dot with a large end and then several small dots with the smaller end, because I figured I'm going to make it more of a lacy look and just kind of build out that side a little bit since I'm coming towards the end of the stone. And I ended up going ahead and just doing this going all the way around. And when you get to this second row, just do however many dots fit the space. I made sure to keep these little sections defined by making sure that they didn't connect to one another. So that section didn't connect with the other section where I was walking the dots. And what I mean by that is if you watch, when I go to walk the dots in right there, that there is a gap between the other side where I had walked 2 rows of dots. So that dot that I am walking towards has some space and kind of becomes more of a focal point instead of it all blending together. And this kind of helps define the piece a little bit more, and it helps that previous row stand out as its own. Next, I decided to do like a little triangle type shape going around. So I'm just doing one dot going into the space, once again, leaving some of that blue showing. And then I'm going to go back in with a little bit of a larger tool just under it, and I'm just doing 2 underneath it. So I made it like a little triangle. And I'm going to end up just doing that going all the way around, and it just kind of filling in that space, giving it another little area to kind of catch your eye, but not taking away from the rest of the stone. And to finish it off, I just went in with a slightly smaller tool and just put one little dot underneath that to kind of complete a little diamond shape. So I really thought this piece was done at this point. I wasn't planning on doing any top dots on it because I felt that like it just looked really good the way it was, and I was kind of leaning towards less is more. But in the morning, once it dried, I realized that the white paint was still a little too thick, and it left some little spikes and rough areas on the dots, and it didn't look as smooth as I wanted it to. So I decided to test out a few top dots to see if I was going to like that or not. I wasn't sure. I worked really fast here because I wasn't sure if I was going to keep them or if I was going to wipe them all off with a wet Q-tip. But I ended up liking them and ended up keeping them because they ended up perfectly covering up those little spikes that I had in my paint. So a couple of these dots I had to correct with a pen because since the dots were a little uneven, the top dots didn't want to be as smooth. So I just used a little pen to kind of round out the dot and kind of reshape it. And I really am happy I added the top dots now. I went back and forth on it and I wasn't sure, but I think it worked out on the end. So with these top dots, I am doing them off center. I thought that would be a little neat and something a little different. And I am making sure that there is white showing all the way around that dot. I didn't want the blue top dot to touch the base color because it would make them look like little moons instead of off-center dots, which is actually a pretty cool effect if you want to play around with that idea, but that's not the look I was going for this particular piece. I ended up going ahead and putting some top dots more towards the center, but I left that first row alone. I did add some and I didn't like the way it looked, so I wiped those off. And then I decided that the piece was done. So this is the finished look, and I really like the way it turned out. I'm glad I added the top dots. I think it still would have looked great either way. So you can decide if you want to add top dots to yours or not. If you like this tutorial, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, just comment below. Thanks, guys.